Because if you just go with your normal approach, I would call it index-like approach, I mean, you're not going to win a medal at the Olympics.
Welcome to The Portfolio, WTW's investment podcast series aimed at institutional investors, industry professionals, and enthusiasts alike.
Hello and welcome to the Portfolio Investment Podcast with me, Lockmar, as your host. The title of today's episode is Speed Skating, Lessons for Life and Investment. And that is not a metaphor. We really are just going to talk about speed skating. There are, of course, many interesting people on board the good ship WTW. But when I found out about the double life of today's guest, I just had to get him on the show. And yes, we will draw some parallels with the investment world, mainly so this can count as work. But really, I mostly just want to talk about speed skating and the Winter Olympic Games. So Dany Lemay, welcome to our show.
Hi, Locke. Super excited to be with you today.
Now, you're an investment consultant at WTW. In fact, you lead our Montreal investment business, but you've also been involved in the skating world, specifically short track speed skating, for over 25 years, I believe, in various capacities, just coming back from the Beijing Winter Olympics as an announcer. And skating is a sport that really caught my eye watching the games, even before the idea of this episode ever came about, alongside the figure skating, of course, and the super cool newer freestyle events as amongst the most exciting spectator sports from the Winter Games, and curling, of course, which was big in the UK for that fortnight, giving us our only 2 medals. So Dany, first of all, can you give us a quick overview of short track skating?
Of course, it's I would say it's kind of a hybrid between the more traditional speed skating that people used to see, I mean, on long track, 400-meter kind of track, and car racing to some extent. For us in North America, we tend to compare it to NASCAR racing on ice. But it's certainly a nice combination of obviously strength, technique, agility, but also tactics. And that's why I've seen links over my career between what you have to do on the investment side with what I had to do as an athlete and now what I have to do as a short track speed skating announcer.
Yeah, and I'll just have a go at describing the experience of watching this sport. So purely in the context of sheer entertainment value. For me, it is all about chaos and drama from the outside. So, you know what you mentioned NASCAR. So, when you're driving a car and you take a corner too fast, and for that split second, you wonder if you're going to make it round. Well, that kind of tension basically runs, as far as I can tell, all the way through watching a race. And there's all this quite aggressive jostling for position, people crashing into each other, spinning out, crashing into the barriers on the side, and these kind of razor sharp blades on the skates flailing around all over the place. It's a bit like watching like Game of Thrones or other TV shows, that are known for being ruthless with their characters, as in absolutely anything can happen to anybody. Favorites can go out very easily. Front runners in a race, they take each other out, and then someone storms through. And I think, Dany, probably my favorite spectacle, if I can tempt our listeners to look this up on YouTube, perhaps, is the relay race, which is carnage. So in a relay, you've got the skaters who are actually racing, they're kind of flying around this outer circle, and then meanwhile their teammates are going around an inner circle because they're trying to keep up their momentum, and all the time people are jostling, falling over, picking themselves up. And then for the relay changeover, which is my favorite bit, so instead of passing on a baton, you charge up to your teammates, basically give them a shove, so you're passing your momentum onto them and you launch them off into the race. So me and my missus watched a lot of this and we absolutely loved it. Most entertained. Hopefully that's just a quick flavor of what the sport is like. In terms of participation, Dany, I think in many places around the world it's still seen as a bit of a niche sport, if you like, but I understand it's actually quite popular in many countries. So where is skating a big sport, and which countries are the dominant ones, would you say, other than mighty Canada, of course?
Yeah, no, certainly. Well, it is fair to say that Canada and the United States basically launched the sport back in the 60s, 70s. But since it became an Olympic sport, first as a demonstration sport in '88 in Calgary, actually in Canada, and then an official sport in Albertville in France in 1992, various parts of the globe, I mean, picked up the sport, and the Asian countries, especially South Korea, China, Japan, really picked it up early. And I would say over the last 15 years, I mean, Europe, a large number of dominant countries like the Netherlands, like Italy, like Hungary now that has really picked up short track quite well, really made short track a true global sport. I mean, we had, I think, 7 different countries that won medals in Beijing a few weeks ago, really showcasing again how global the sport has become.
I think my job as a podcast host is to be a little bit challenging, Dany, even if we're just talking about sports. So I do have a couple of slightly spiky questions for you, if you don't mind. So the first one is related to my early observation that this is sprint racing, but with quite a lot more contact than you see, for example, in a running or a swimming race. There is a lot of jostling for position. There were definitely a few naughty hands in Beijing. So I know there are rules about not cutting people up and so on. But to me, I think being at least sharp elbowed and testing the limits of the rules, those feel like things that could give you a bit of an advantage. So, Dany, I mean, is this a sport where nice guys tend to finish last?
It's fair to say that as an athlete, I mean, and you're trying to test the limit of the rules, and clearly we have on ice officials and we have video referees as well, making sure that skaters stay within the rules. But I would like to say that if I think of some of the best short track speed skaters in the world, like a Charles Lemay, like an Ariana Fontana, who's the Olympian that has won the most medal in short track, very nice people off the ice. I mean, no doubt about that. But yeah, on the ice, I mean, you got to be fighting for your spot. If you're too much of a nice skater, I think you're gonna end up, I mean, having some problems, and everyone will pass you inside or outside anytime. But yeah, it's finding that sweet spot where you can keep your spot, find a place in the pack to jump in a better position. And as I said earlier, it's a very strategic sport, especially when you get to that Olympic level where, I mean, all the athletes are in very good shape. They're all great skaters, and it's a matter of who has the best tactic on the day.
Yeah, you mentioned the athletes being in good shape, and one of the things that me and my missus noticed is you got to be in shape to get into those costumes. I mean, they look superhuman, but I think if you put me in that, it's not going to have the same effect. And my second spiky question is, I guess to some extent about skating, but probably more about winter sports in general, and it's to do with inclusion, big theme running right through our podcasts. Especially if I look at events like alpine and freestyle skating, you see these very cool, glamorous, very talented people doing amazing things, and I think to myself, how did you get this good? And I just get a bit of a vibe that these were maybe the kids who went skiing 4 times a year with their wealthy families, and that's how their talent got discovered and then honed again with a lot of family support that's not available to everyone. So are winter sports a bit of an exclusive club in that sense?
Well, yeah, as I think of short track speed skating, certainly if we go back to diversity, we're very proud, maybe because we're a newer sport, maybe that's part of it. But if you look at the athletes, if you look at the coaches, at the referees, I mean, and as I mentioned earlier, a true global sport. I think diversity, that's something we're really proud of as a sport. In terms of how you get started, I'll take my own example. I mean, for many people in Canada, you get into speed skating or figure skating as a way to learn how to skate. In some cases, trying to become a better hockey player, ice hockey player, which was my case, but ended up preferring short track speed skating than hockey. And to what I've seen in the previous years with some of the other winter sports, like skiing as an example, speed skating and short track speed skating in general are less expensive and easier for families to get into. And we have a tradition in short track of seeing brothers and sisters moving up the ladder in the sport, and I mean, short track being a truly family sport. So that's something, again, that we're very proud in terms of the culture that we have in speed skating.
So now on to your own involvement in speed skating, Dany. Can you just give us a run through of your own competitive career on the skating circuit, pun intended, obviously? And I've also heard that there's actually a link between your skating and getting a job in the investment industry with WTW. So we'd love to hear about that as well. So kind of over to you.
So yes, I mean, I had the privilege of beginning in the sport at the age of 4. My father thought that it would be a good way to become a faster skater in order to ultimately become a better hockey player. But I really picked up the sport at an early age, and at the age of 14, moved to Quebec City to train with more of an elite club, where actually one of my teammates studied actuarial mathematics at Laval University, and that's where I got to learn about what it could be. And really years later, after I won the Canadian Championship in 1998, which was kind of the peak of my skating career, but knew at the time it wasn't enough to potentially compete at the next Olympic Games. So I retired from the sport. And got a co-op internship at Towers Parent back then, meeting actually one of my former teammates from speed skating. And when I came home in Montreal, switched to the investment side of the business, where I've been for the last 22 years, and I would say the rest is history.
Wow. And I do want to circle back again, and another pun. I want to circle back to talking about, your kind of double life, kind of parallel lives, balancing your job as an investment professional and another serious professional passion, if you like. But let's just talk first about your move to becoming an announcer. What does an announcer do, and how did you get into that?
Well, the role of an announcer, outside of being more of the in-house or PA announcer, introducing the athletes, awarding the medals, things like that, in short track speed skating, we began the trend 25, 30 years ago of actually describing the action like you would hear on TV, but we would do it for the audience in a way to not only make it entertaining. As you said earlier, the sport is already quite exciting, which makes my job as an announcer easier in a way, but also trying to teach the audience and get them to understand and appreciate the sport and the athletes a bit more. So really got into it because we had the World Cup in Montreal where I did not qualify as a representative of the Canadian team, but they needed someone on the microphone that knew the sport well, knew the athletes. So I had that role for the weekend, and that was back in '95. And since then, I've done pretty much every world-class competition in Canada, and that led me, as you said earlier, to 4 Olympic Games in that role. I would have never imagined that back in 1995.
So Beijing was your 4th game as an announcer. How did you find Beijing? And actually, across all the 4 games, do you have like a favorite moment to look back on?
Olympics, World Cups, World Championship, National Championships, in a way, they're all the same in terms of how I need to do my job. Obviously, what's around it is magnified, I mean, 10 times when you're at the Olympics compared to any World Championships. Certainly, the Beijing Games were really unique because of the context with COVID-19, with the Olympic bubble that they had put in place. So I think the structure of the Olympic bubble made it that we could really, I would say, deliver the games in a way that we could not have imagined in the context of the pandemic. Certainly, it wasn't as festive for me. I could not go really see other events or really walk around the city like I would normally. And going back to your question, I mean, certainly my very first Olympic Games back home in Canada, in Vancouver, was certainly something that was quite unique. But then having the chance to work in Russia, to work in South Korea, in the context that were there at the time, made it quite unique human experience at the same time.
Okay, so I mentioned earlier, this idea of people in, I guess, traditional professional jobs, which they then combine with this very serious passion. I'm not calling it a hobby. I think, it's much stronger than that, obviously. Here we're talking about sport, but I also know of various musicians, players at various, card games, board games, etc., who are still close to a professional level, many of them staying very, very deeply involved in this other pursuit that they're passionate about. And I would, of course, count you as belonging to that group, Dany. And then you can see the links between these worlds. For example, the link between mathematical ability and musical ability is well known, and so on. So Dany, in terms of elite competitive sport in your case, what links do you see between that and your day job? Are there things that skating has taught you that's useful to you as an investment consultant or in life in general?
Certainly, as I think of the different roles I've played, I've had the chance to play in the world of short track speed skating. Certainly, as an athlete, of course, you have to deal with pressure. You get to learn to deal with pressure. You got to deal with failures and losses. In a typical weekend of a short track speed skating competition, you have 8 to 10 races. You're not going to win all of those, and it's how you rebound from a loss or from disappointment that gets you moving upward, which is obviously a great skill to have in life, and being disciplined. I mean, no doubt about that. Again, you'll have ups and downs, and you got to be disciplined to succeed. I was a coach for about 7 years, and that's really where I learned to mentor, teaching people, get people to do or succeed in a way that they would not have thought themselves possible, because you believe in them and you know what they're capable of doing. I've became a referee about 15 years ago. I'm now an international referee as well, and certainly that's a role that taught me to make decisions with imperfect information, which again, something in real life that you have to do. And last but not least, as an announcer, as I think of trying to be short, precise communication, the art of storytelling. I mean, that's obviously something I had to master, and that I have to master as an announcer, which is also true as a consultant, trying to help the committees I work with to make the best decision possible. So now I feel very privileged that again, my involvement in speed skating gave me a broader toolbox to support me as an investment consultant.
And it kind of brings to mind what I say to my kids is just get good at something. Doesn't matter what it is, because getting good at something helps you get good at all other things almost. And now this is the point where we try to draw out some investment specific lessons from speed skating. So having talked about all these parallels, hopefully our listeners appreciate it's less contrived than it might sound. In Eastern philosophy, if you indulge me, that there is this strong theme that, dedication to any pursuit can reveal some, much deeper truths. It's even less of a stretch when you think about speed skating and investment in this context. In both of those things, you're trying to outcompete other participants. Both of these things involve a large element, as you say, of risk taking and uncertainty. What are some of the lessons that we can draw from speed skating that we can apply to investing and managing an asset portfolio? And I'm going to, just to start you off, I mean, perhaps like anything in terms of, optimizing performance, especially in the context of outperforming, whether that's you're outperforming your own objective or outperforming a peer group.
Certainly, well, clearly being really skilled in one area, whether it's in sports or in a career, I mean, can certainly propel you to the next level, but also can propel you to get to master another area. I'll give an example at the Olympics. Some will come at it with a very good technique. Some will come at it with very strong, like strong legs, things like that. But to win at any level, I mean, you got to be well balanced, and I think that's something you learn early in sports. That's something you got to learn at some point in your investment career. Definitely, you can work with your teams. You can work with people. I mean, all around the globe. In our case, at WTW, to do that. But you got to know your strength, and you got to make sure you work also on your weaknesses to get better over time. And going back to risk taking, as you mentioned earlier, when people look at the Olympics and short track speed skating, to your point earlier, it's very, very exciting. I mean, very dramatic, even chaotic to some extent. But that's because you got to take some risk. Because if you just go with your normal approach, I would call it index-like approach. I mean, you're not going to win a medal at the Olympics. Which again goes back to having conviction, having a way to take reasonable amount of risk to succeed or outperform. And I've seen that also in life and in work dealing with committee, making sure that they're first obviously comfortable with the risk they're facing and the risk that they're going to be taking, but you got to be willing to take some risk in order to succeed in the long run. So certainly two elements that I had to transpose from what I've seen and live in speed skating with what I see and live now as an investment consultant.
Another area that I think is worth touching on, which you've already mentioned, is coping mentally with uncertainty. Again, we talked about how people crash out, winners and losers, they swap places and so on. Watching the Olympics, you see athletes introduced as strong favourites or world champions, and 2 seconds later, their dream is dashed. No chance of Olympic glory, not for at least another 4 years, if ever, which of course adds to the drama for people like me watching, but must be extremely hard to take. So how do skaters build up the sort of mentality to take on those kinds of setbacks?
No, it's something that always amazed me when I watch the Olympics. Obviously, from my vantage point, and I mean, I have some good friends that have been, great athletes at the Olympics as well, and it's always fascinating how, to your point, they may be competing on the Monday and they have a huge disappointment, and on the Wednesday they're back on track to compete for potentially a medal in another event. And yes, that's really where mental strength is key. And obviously in life, we all have our ups and downs, and it's the same thing in business. You can't outperform every year, and you got to make sure that you rebound from things that maybe don't go your way in the short term. But that's where I think for those athletes, similar to how I've seen my own career here, it's truly having a long-term mindset. And I know that with our clients, they often have that kind of long-term time horizon, and always keep that in mind. And yes, you got to go through the downs of that you may have in the short term, but that's how you succeed. And sports is full of story of athletes who did not succeed at first, or struggle at their first Olympics and came up at the second or third time around and won medals. And for me, that's a great metaphor for what we have to go through in life. And I think that the recent, COVID-19 pandemic has been a prime example as to how you can't really overcome difficulties and coming up on the right track.
Yeah, and I think there's different types of, not failure, but not getting the success you want. There is the kind of, I've done all the right stuff and it didn't work out, or versus the, there are things I could have avoided. And I think, that might bring some kind of solace as well. Look, Dany, I would happily carry on talking for hours on this, but I think it's probably time to reluctantly start wrapping up this episode. I hope we've managed to give people a sense of speed skating as a sport. As a final thought, say our listeners are interested in trying out the sport, assuming they can already stay more or less upright in a pair of skates, and especially have mastered turning left, which I think is far more important than turning right in this case. How does one get into the actual racing part of it?
Yes, there's an increasing number of speed skating clubs, in various countries all around the world. And fun fact, people would not think that intuitively, but it's actually easier to learn to skate on speed skates because of the long blades than you would have on either figure skating or hockey skates. So it's sometimes, especially as an adult, an easier way to learn to skate. And for kids, it's just a fun way to get to learn their balance and have fun in the ice. So certainly encourage all the listeners to try it out one day.
So thank you very much, Dany, for coming on and telling us about speed skating and your own personal story as well.
Thanks for having me.
We wish you, of course, the very best of luck with future Winter Games as well. As a follow-up to this episode, one request I like to make to our listeners is to let me know about your own passions outside of work that you pursue at a very high semi-professional standard that you then combine with your day job as a finance professional. I'm relatively easy to find on LinkedIn, so please do drop me a private message if you're willing to share. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed listening to my chat with Dany, and do take care until next time.
You've been listening to a WTW podcast. For more information on WTW and the solutions we provide, visit WTWco.com.